Ah, I'm tired. In the middle of the night, I head home with an exhausted body. Due to work, I stayed at the office quite late. Feeling sorry for my husband Felix and my father-in-law Oliver, who I live with, I hurried home. Suddenly, I stopped in front of my house. The garage was open. Before I could wonder why, the car in the garage suddenly sped out. I let out a small scream, eek, and shrank back. The car that had sped out suddenly stopped in front of me. Oliver was gripping the steering wheel in the driver's seat, and as soon as he noticed me, he opened the passenger door from the inside.
Louisa! Get in the car!
What? Wait a minute. What's going on? At this hour?
Don't make a fuss. I'll explain later. Just get in quickly.
Pushed by his intense urgency, I quickly opened the passenger door and got into the car. Before I could lock my seatbelt, Oliver sped off again, and I let out another small scream, eek. As the car started, I heard a shout from behind. Turning around, I saw Felix shouting something unintelligible. He seemed to be chasing the speeding car, desperately trying to catch up with us. What is this situation? Felix, with a furious expression, was chasing us from behind, while Oliver, with a serious face, gripped the steering wheel. Sandwiched between the two, I could only continue to grimace in fear. My name is Louisa. I work at a company near the station and live with my husband Felix and my father-in-law Oliver. My husband and I work at the same place, but Felix is a full-time employee, and I work part-time. I handle most of the housework, and Felix helps out without complaint when asked. Felix has a handsome face. At random moments, he looks at me with his droopy eyes and slightly raised mouth corners. While washing dishes, he would stare at me with a slight smile, making me chuckle. What? What are you looking at?
Your hairstyle. I think you look very beautiful with your hair tied back.
I almost dropped the dish I was washing. Felix is always like this. He compliments me on parts of myself that I don't pay attention to at random moments. It's an obvious lip service, but it still makes me happy to be complimented. He is kind. Or rather, he might be too kind. At work, Felix is my boss. Even when mistakes happen, Felix never gets angry with me and always provides appropriate assistance and guidance. To others, he may appear as a kind and wonderful husband. I think so too. However, there is a strange uneasiness lingering in my heart, and I wonder if I am a bad person for not being able to trust my overly kind husband. Felix and I met at our current workplace. I remember that I didn't think anything special when we first met. Perhaps we progressed to marriage because we had common points with each other. That was a long time ago. My parents died in a car accident. It happened when I was in the 5th grade, on our way to a hotel for a trip. I was looking at the different countryside scenery from the car window. Suddenly, my father shouted,
Stop! No!
And my mother pulled me close with a pained cry. The driver of the oncoming car had an epileptic seizure and crashed into our car, making the news. My father and mother died. I only suffered minor fractures in my arms and legs. Relatives and friends who came to visit me said things like it's a miracle and I'm glad you're safe, as if I was lucky. Looking at my bandaged limbs, I questioned if this was really a miracle and if it was really good. My mother's relative, with tears in her eyes, said,
Your mother died in a position protecting you. You have to live for her too.
No, this is a dream. It's all fake.
Yes, I understand. You're confused now. It's okay. Everything will be okay.
I pressed my bandaged hand against the hospital bed rail to confirm the pain. It was real pain, not fake. I couldn't stop crying. I was sad that my parents had died and that I was alive. Even so, I grew up supported by many kind relatives. I think I received a lot of love. I always resolved in my heart that I had to become a responsible adult. After that, I worked hard as a member of society. I met Felix at the same workplace and gradually noticed his diligent work attitude. His way of dealing with customers, his serious and sincere attitude. He was kind to everyone and had good looks, so I thought he was out of my league and not a romantic interest. But Felix was the one who invited me on our first date. And the second and third dates were also initiated by him. At the end of our third date, I couldn't suppress my feelings for him. When I asked him to go out with me, Felix, with a slightly clouded expression, told me about his past.
I lost my mother and live with my elderly father. Also, I recently got divorced.
I see.
I'm trying to forget about the divorce by focusing on work. Knowing I'm a divorced man, you might reconsider dating me, right?
I don't mind. Because I like your dedication to your work, Felix. Felix looked a little surprised and then smiled gently. The longer our relationship lasted, the more we were drawn to each other. Just before I turned 40, Felix proposed to me. It was in a dimly lit restaurant on a high floor with a beautiful view of the night sea. In a situation that seemed made for a proposal, he seriously asked me to marry him. At that moment, I felt like the protagonist of a movie. Back when I lost my parents, felt despair, and thought this world was fake, it finally felt like the scenery before me had become real. Felix told me about his family, which he hadn't talked much about before. His mother had already passed away, and he lived with his elderly father, Oliver. He suggested that we live together with Oliver after marriage, because he was worried about him, and I readily agreed. Both Oliver and my husband are kind, and we live a satisfying life. We decided not to have children. Felix and I, knowing the pain and sadness of losing parents, were afraid of becoming parents ourselves. I am content with this way of life. A few years into our marriage, Felix was incredibly kind. He accepted almost all of my suggestions and laughed off my failures in housework. He would laugh, then quickly turn his back to me and look somewhere far away. His kindness gradually changed in my mind. I began to think he was indifferent to me. Moreover, Felix didn't talk much about himself. His work was fulfilling but demanding. His return times were irregular, and he often secluded himself in his study on holidays. His actions lacked consistency, like suddenly inviting me to go shopping or on a date, or worrying about Oliver. Somewhere, I heard the phrase, "People who cheat have leisure." I don't remember where I heard it, but Felix's relaxed demeanor always puzzled me. Felix was handsome and popular, but I couldn't tolerate infidelity. Wanting to trust Felix, I decided to hire a detective agency to investigate. They said it would take a week. The investigation was surprisingly expensive, but if it proved Felix's innocence, I could truly believe he was a kind person. When I returned home from the detective agency, I found Oliver sitting in a chair, clutching his chest. Oliver! I rushed over, rubbed his back, and handed him his medicine and water. Oliver had a heart condition and was prescribed several medications. Due to his age, he also took many medications for managing blood pressure and cholesterol. Although I wasn't told the details, the medications seemed to be more for controlling the progression of his illness rather than curing it.
Thank you. I should feel better in a bit.
Oliver said. Although Oliver usually lived like a healthy person, sudden attacks were troublesome. These included chest pain, breathing difficulties, and muscle spasms, which mostly subsided if he lay down in bed, but could become disastrous if the situation worsened. Recently, Oliver's health had deteriorated. I stayed close to him, watching over him. I wanted to consult Felix, but he didn't come home even late at night, and his responses to my messages were always,
I'm busy. Sorry.
Since we worked at the same place, I thought I knew how busy Felix was, but he was the one who suggested taking care of Oliver, yet he was being a bit harsh. I pouted as I organized Oliver's many medications into a case. It felt off. A week later, I was in the narrow office of the detective agency. Sitting on a well-worn sofa, I listened to the findings of the investigation. In conclusion, Felix was having an affair. I was told he was in a relationship with a woman named Ida. Ida, a name I had never heard before. As I looked at the name of this unknown woman and the photo of her profile, which seemed to have been taken secretly, I felt depressed. Divorce. I muttered as if it were someone else's problem. Losing my parents and getting used to loneliness, I had grasped a fleeting happiness. I smiled faintly. Returning home, I put the documents from the detective agency on an unused shelf. I put a kettle of water on the stove and started preparing my favorite herbal tea. As I poured hot water into the glass pot, the sweet, honey-like scent of linden filled the room.
What a nice aroma, Louisa.
Oliver said, coming out of his room while holding his leg slightly and smiling. I immediately supported Oliver by his side and sat him down on the living room sofa. When I handed him the TV remote, he shook his head quietly, so I made 2 cups of freshly brewed herbal tea and sat down.
It's delicious. I should sleep well.
Oliver said. How are you feeling, Oliver? I asked.
There are good times and bad times. But how about you, Louisa? Aren't you tired from taking care of me?
Oliver added with a laugh, as if it was difficult to say in front of me. That smile was very similar to Felix's when we first met. Maybe that's why. I found myself speaking as if I were in front of Felix. I told Oliver that I had hired a detective agency to investigate Felix. I expressed my feelings of being unable to forgive him. I mentioned that I would confront Felix with the facts and consider divorce depending on his attitude, and that I had prepared the documents. When I noticed Oliver listening to my story with a serious look, I immediately regretted it. This kind of talk, it's a marital issue, and it would only burden Oliver, who was suffering from health problems.
Thank you for telling me.
Oliver said. I tilted my head, not understanding the meaning of his words. Feeling awkward, I took my herbal tea and stood up to go to the kitchen. When I glanced back, Oliver was staring into space with a troubled expression. For a while after that, I hesitated to confront Felix with the fact of his affair. If we divorced, our current life would be destroyed. Having experienced the sudden change in life due to a car accident, I hated change. I was convinced that today was the same as yesterday and tomorrow the same as today was happiness. Even if it was a life connected by fake love. One day, due to not being able to fully focus on work because of taking care of Oliver, a problem arose with one of my clients. I had to come up with a clear plan to address the complaint. Long overtime hours were expected. I asked Felix to leave work early that day to take care of Oliver. Late at night, I walked home, exhausted. It took a long time, but I thought I had finally created the new schedule. Feeling sorry for coming home late, I hurried towards the house. I stopped in front of the house. The garage was open. Before I could think why, the car in the garage suddenly sped out. I let out a small scream and shrank back as the car screeched to a halt in front of me.
Louisa! Get in the car!
Oliver shouted.
What? Wait a minute. What's going on? At this hour?
Don't make a fuss. I'll explain later. Just get in quickly.
Pushed by his urgent tone, I quickly opened the passenger door and got in. Before I could lock my seatbelt, Oliver sped off again, making me let out another small scream. As the car sped off, I heard a shout from behind. When I looked back, Felix was yelling something unintelligible. He seemed to be chasing the speeding car, desperately trying to catch up, but soon disappeared as the car turned a corner. With that volume, his voice must have echoed throughout the neighborhood at this late hour. I sank deeply into the seat and sighed. It was the first time I had seen Felix, usually so calm and composed, so agitated. Oliver, in the driver's seat, said nothing. It was probably something serious. I didn't know what had happened, but I decided to wait for Oliver to speak. For a while, we just drove on the public road. It didn't seem like we had a specific destination, just driving aimlessly. Finally, we stopped at a convenience store with a large parking lot. Oliver rested his forehead on the steering wheel and took a deep breath.
Oliver! What happened? Felix seemed very angry.
I'm sorry for the confusion. Well, where should I start?
Oliver tapped his forehead on the steering wheel a few times, seemingly organizing his thoughts. Trying to be considerate, I said, "I'll get us some drinks." And bought drinks from the convenience store, handing one to Oliver.
Sorry, Louisa. This is going to be a bit of a long story. Will you listen?
With that preface, Oliver began his story. Oliver said,
Yes, that's right. I need to start by talking about my wife, Felix's mother, Eliza.
It was surprising that the root of this commotion was related to my deceased mother-in-law, and I tilted my head in confusion. Felix's mother, Eliza, was said to be a very amorous person. In her youth, she apparently dated multiple men simultaneously.
You might think I should have divorced such a person, Louisa. But we already had young Felix. Considering that, I couldn't decide on a divorce.
Oliver said. I thought I could understand a little. The reason I couldn't immediately demand a divorce after discovering Felix's affair was the fear of losing family. Marriage is not just a connection with the partner. I might lose Oliver, who has been kind to me, and his friends. Thinking that way, I couldn't take a step forward.
But Eliza was never an irresponsible woman. That might have been her only virtue.
Oliver continued. He said that Eliza made time for all the men she was dating and faced them earnestly. She never pushed household chores or childcare onto Oliver. She fulfilled her duties as a mother and wife with Oliver's cooperation, and used the free time that ordinary women might spend on hobbies to be with other men. She also considered Felix's development and never revealed the truth to him. Oliver smiled slightly as he looked at the bright lights of the convenience store in front of us.
Eliza used to say it was pure and honest multiple dating as if it were her catchphrase.
Oliver said. He accepted Eliza's lifestyle. He had no choice but to forgive it. Although it didn't feel good, he realized that pretending not to see it had almost no impact. But their time as a family was to end very quickly. Eliza was diagnosed with a brain tumor at a young age and was told she didn't have long to live, but she remained nonchalant.
Before her condition worsened, Eliza told each of her lovers about her illness and said goodbye. And in the end,
Oliver let go of the steering wheel and gently looked at his palm. In the end, she passed away in the hospital ward, holding Oliver's hand.
but I couldn't just be depressed. For Eliza's sake, I worked hard to raise Felix properly.
Oliver said. However, bad signs began to appear when Felix was in high school. Felix grew up to be an extreme womanizer. Unlike Eliza, he inherited only her amorous nature in the worst way. He would charm women with gentlemanly behavior and then irresponsibly discard them when he got bored. Oliver tried to stop this by having careful conversations with Felix. But Felix's bad habits with women never changed, and he eventually got married to me.
At first, I was against marriage. It was obvious that you would be unhappy, Louisa, but Felix.
Oliver proposed living together as a condition for marriage. For Oliver, who had physical disabilities, it was a very attractive offer. However, most of Oliver's care was left to me, and while Felix appeared kind on the surface, he was always out playing. Despite being busy with work, he still made time to cheat, which was practically a disease. At first, he said things like,
I'll stop playing around and prioritize married life.
Oliver thought he would observe for a while, but in reality, Felix was secretly playing around. In the end, a person's nature doesn't change easily. Oliver said,
Louisa, you told me about the results of the detective agency's investigation, didn't you? I was grateful for that. I thought it was time to give Felix the good scolding.
It's kind of a strange story, I replied.
What? Oh, yes, it is. Felix is twisted. I need to face my son properly.
Oliver said. I looked down slightly. It wasn't just Felix who seemed strange to me. Eliza and even Oliver seemed odd. Eliza, who proudly had affairs. Oliver, who continued to forgive her with a strange kind of love. Pure and honest multiple dating? I felt a bit sorry for Oliver as he spoke about it with a hint of pride. By the way, why did you suddenly take me outside? Felix seemed very angry. I asked.
When you came home earlier, Felix was happily talking on the phone with his lover. I thought it would be too harsh for you to see it directly.
Oliver said. Apparently, Oliver had angrily snatched Felix's phone and smashed it on the floor. That's why Felix was angry and chased after us. But wait a minute. I already knew from the detective agency's investigation that Felix was having an affair. I didn't really care about him talking to another woman on the phone now.
Have you calmed down a bit?
Oliver asked. Yes, I have. I replied. Maybe Oliver was angry for my sake, but also for his own. Anger towards the deceased Eliza. He might be directing his misplaced anger at Felix. He probably wasn't even aware of it himself. Betrayed by someone and justifying it, with no one left to hate. Oliver started the engine, and the car began to move. We talked about confronting Felix with the fact of his affair when we got home. We parked the car in the garage. Felix, who had been silently drinking whiskey in the living room, glared at us resentfully. I silently placed the detective agency's report on the table. Felix, slightly drunk, rubbed his eyes and looked through the documents.
This is, yes, a junior from my school days. It's not an affair or anything like that.
Felix said.
That's a poor excuse. The photos and the investigation results are clear.
I replied.
It's true. She seemed troubled with work and wanted a quiet place where we could be alone.
Felix made a desperate excuse. It was rare to see him so flustered and lacking his usual composure. I had loved Felix for his dedication to work and his kind smile towards me. But now, looking at him, it felt like his facade had fallen away. My feelings for Felix rapidly cooled, and his desperate excuses, no matter how valid or invalid they were, became irrelevant to me. Oliver said.
Enough, Felix. Pay Louisa the alimony and agree to the divorce.
Felix responded.
This is a marital issue, isn't it? Stay out of it, Dad!
Oliver retorted.
I will interfere, because I'm your father.
Felix was taken aback and then looked at me, quietly smiling. He must have realized from my cold eyes that I no longer had any affection for him. Honestly, I didn't have a strong desire to get a divorce. The procedures for divorce are troublesome, and there are many other hassles like changing my family register. But if I didn't take a step forward here, I would remain an unhappy woman forever. Living a life pretending not to notice my husband's affair. I don't completely deny Oliver's way of living, but it still feels strange. I can't arrogantly talk about what the ideal marriage should look like. But I couldn't understand a relationship where one person is always sad or heartbroken.
Felix, let's get a divorce. Right now.
Felix pleaded.
Wait, Louisa! I understand. I'll change my ways. I won't cheat anymore. I'll only look at you. So, please.
I no longer intend to look at you,
I said. With those words, Felix fell silent, and the night quietly passed. A year has passed since then. Felix surprisingly divorced me quite easily. Despite being a frivolous man, he still sends me emails like, "How are you?" or "Shall we go on a date?" I don't know if he's joking or serious, but I completely ignore him. Today is a sunny day. The cool, clear sky stretches above. I looked at myself in the mirror of the restroom, wearing a white dress that might be considered too youthful for my age. I'm still young. I'm still beautiful. The words Felix frequently said to me might have been lies, but the feelings I have now are undoubtedly genuine. My phone vibrated in my bag. When I put it to my ear, I heard a familiar voice.
Louisa? It's been a while.
It was Oliver on the phone, telling me about Felix's situation without me even asking. After the divorce, Felix suddenly became quiet and refrained from dating women. He hasn't found a new marriage partner yet and has been seriously taking care of Oliver and focusing on finding a new partner.
Everything is moving in a good direction. Thank you for listening, Louisa.
Oliver said. No, thank you. I'm sorry, but I have someone waiting for me, so I have to go. I hung up the phone and looked at myself in the mirror. I couldn't stay at the same workplace as my ex-spouse, so I found a new job at another company. To live alone, I needed to become a full-time employee, and this recent turmoil made me reflect on many things. Maybe I was afraid of love. The fear of suddenly losing someone important. I lost my parents in an accident, and from that day, my entire life changed. Love might be the same. Even if you love someone, you will inevitably part ways someday. Even if it's not your fault, you might be suddenly told goodbye. Perhaps, during a date, if they say, "I'm going to the bathroom," and never come back, they might get caught in an unfortunate accident. No matter how long you stay together, people will always part with their loved ones. No one can live forever. Knowing that pain, suffering, and sadness from a young age, I might have been somewhat indifferent to love. I'm scared of truly falling in love. Maybe Felix sensed that feeling in me. I have no intention of condoning Felix's infidelity. But if I had truly loved him from the bottom of my heart, if I had desperately clung to him, trying to get his attention, even though he was always kind but somewhat indifferent. It's pointless to even imagine that. I look at myself in the mirror. Have I changed at all since that time a year ago? I lightly touch up my makeup and leave the restroom. In front of the elevator in the crowded shopping mall, there are a few families and couples standing. In that waiting area, a tall man smiles at me, and it feels like only his surroundings brighten up. I smile back at his smile. Casually, I hold his hand. He seemed a little surprised, but he held my hand without letting go. That made me so happy that I couldn't help but smile. Now, to truly find happiness, I take a step forward.
How did you like this story? Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.